In the meantime, we've got Lee Zeldin here. This has been the signature issue for him. Of course, he's been pounding the economy as well, high runaway prices, the adverse business environment, as he's described it, throughout the state. Governor Hochul has spoken on that. They had a debate this past week. The congressman, kind enough to join us right now, Lee Zeldin, is here. Congressman, very good to have you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Neil.
Let's talk a little bit about this attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi. He's expected to recover. But, of course, you're no stranger to violence and attempted violence. This fellow who tried to get you with some brass knuckle type advice right on the campaign stump, he was right next to you. Then a couple of months later, your daughters are at home, and through no fault or target of their own, they're caught in a stray bullet, attack going on, a random attack right in your neighborhood. So you're familiar with crime and threats. What do you make of what happened in San Francisco and what's happening in the nation's tone and temperament now?
When something like that happens to me, when it happens to my family, when it happens to other people like we saw yesterday, it's a reminder that this can happen to anybody. I mean, here you have the husband of the Speaker of the House recovering from injuries from an assault. My daughters were sitting there at home at a kitchen table on a quiet Sunday afternoon just a few weekends back, and there was a drive-by gang-related shooting in my front yard. I mean, a bullet landed 30 feet away. 2 people shot were laying down on the ground 10 feet away. As a 4-term member of Congress who's running for governor, this can happen to my family. It happened to my family, so there's a lot of other New Yorkers who realize it can happen to them. And now routines are changing, people's behaviors. Maybe they used to ride the subway, they don't now. Maybe they used to ride the subway with their yarmulke on, but now they take it off because they're afraid of being targeted for being Jewish or for being Sikh. Maybe they take their turban off. There are individuals who, when they do ride the subway, they're grabbing a pole or a guardrail because they're afraid of being pushed in front of an oncoming subway car. And this isn't just New York City. I mean, I live somewhere between 1 hour and 10 days away from New York City, depending on traffic. In other parts of the state, you have, in the last few weeks, people who have been killed, from a dad going to visit his kid for a parents' weekend at Marist College, who's getting a cup of coffee and checking out of a hotel. And there was a mother who was murdered just outside of Buffalo a couple weeks back in front of her 3 kids. And she was so scared of being murdered by this person, she was actually wearing a bulletproof vest at the time that she was shot. So for New Yorkers, this is real life. They don't want to be lectured that there's nothing to see here, look away. They don't want to be told that it's just a perception. What they want is boldness and courage, understanding that this can happen to anyone. Whether it's for them, it can happen to other people in their lives. They want to see DAs enforcing the law. They want law enforcement to be supported, and they want to roll back pro-criminal laws like cashless bail.
You know, you mentioned cashless bail, Congressman. The suspect in this particular case of the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, this David DePepe, 42 years old. He was arrested on attempted murder and burglary charges. The fellow who attacked you on stage back in the summer, David Joponis, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. He's a veteran. He had some issues. He is to be released from custody in a matter of a few days into an alcohol treatment program. What do you think of that? He was not arrested on trying to potentially harm or even murder a U.S. congressman, but he is going to be released from custody into a treatment program that I assume free after that. What do you think?
And I hope that he gets help. He's a veteran. He has mental health issues. I was told that he had alcoholism issues, and I hope that he gets the help. What happened on stage, that was July 21st.
There is a bit of a double standard there, right? I mean, a threat is a threat.
Yeah, no, and it's a really interesting case because the only reason why he was even detained this entire time was because I'm a member of Congress. So on July 21st, he gets detained within hours. He was released because of New York's cashless bail law. The feds then have to get involved a day and a half later and charge him because I'm a member of Congress. But if I wasn't a member of Congress, he would have never been detained at all. The feds wouldn't have been able to get involved with that charge. I just told you the story of the woman who got murdered just outside of Buffalo. The person who murdered her was her husband, who was charged with a slew of domestic violence charges. Her name is Kiera Hudson. Her husband was Adam Benefield. Adam was charged with a whole bunch of domestic violence offenses, was released on Tuesday, and Kiera was saying, you can't release him. He is going to murder me. The judge releases him on Tuesday. The next day, on Wednesday, he murders her in front of the 3 kids. You know, we had another story recently where there was 2 Mexican cartel drug smugglers got busted with $1.2 million worth of crystal meth, and they were instantly released on cashless bail. So there are other cities and states looking at whether it's DAs who aren't enforcing the law, they're looking at pro-criminal laws like cashless bail, and they're thinking about emulating this stuff elsewhere. So goes New York, so goes the rest of the country. So rises New York, so lifts up the rest of the country. And I would encourage every other state out there to make sure that you are not looking at New York's cashless bail law as a model, and this shouldn't be viewed as a Republican versus Democrat issue. Even the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, says judges should have discretion to weigh dangerousness. He's right, but that's not the law.
He also, though, says that this is much more a problem about guns and firearms, and like Governor Hochul has talked about restricting them. That's where you part company, it seems.
Well, I think that it's important to look at all the different crimes that are committed. There's more to be done as far as the criminal with an illegal firearm committing crime after crime after crime, and they're back out on the street. I've said that my first action the first day that I'm in office is telling the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg that he's being fired. There are people who are out on the streets who don't have a prosecutor in Manhattan who's willing to hold these criminals accountable. So at our debate the other night, we were asked question after question about crime, and that's great. But I pointed out, and you could say I was trying to do Kathy Hochul even a favor. I'm mentioning she hasn't yet spoken about the whole lock up the criminal part of criminal justice, you know, putting handcuffs on the bad guys instead of on the justice system. And she responded by saying she doesn't understand why that's so important to me. And when she says that, it's really saying that she doesn't understand why it's so important to everybody out there who's concerned about this issue. They want to support law enforcement. They want DAs to be able to do their job. If a DA thinks it stands for defense attorney instead of district attorney, then go be a defense attorney. And we have a real issue that we don't want to be lectured about is just a perception. Now, all sorts of crimes are being committed, and we're just talking about illegal firearms. But we also have people who are concerned about being thrown in front of oncoming subway cars. There are people who are being stabbed. That's an issue. We have people who are getting robbed. They're small business owners. It's happening all day long throughout the week, and there's just no consequences. And small businesses and larger businesses are folding up shop, and they don't have the people in government doing what they need to do to actually enforce these laws. And when Alvin Bragg came in, his day one memo, he said that he wasn't going to enforce all different kinds of laws, including fair jumping. Now, the other impacts of these policies is that now the MTA wants to enact something called congestion pricing. Kathy Hochul supports this plan called congestion pricing. It's a new fee to get into Manhattan. And we should be looking at this all across the entire country, what's happening in New York, because as we look here in New York to what happened in London, it resulted in more congestion, ironically, and that's what's going to happen here in New York. But they say they need more money for the MTA. How about if you enforce fair jumping, that's hundreds of millions of dollars? If you want more money for the MTA, how about you improve ridership experience and make it safer instead of reaching into the pocket of the driver? So there are economic consequences. There are the consequences of New Yorkers leaving this state more than people fleeing any other state anywhere else in the country. And we have to turn this all around, and we have an opportunity just 10 days away. This morning was the start of in-person early voting. We're on Staten Island right now. We were in Rochester last night. We're working as hard as possible, and we're feeling great about the momentum, the energy, the issues are on our side. We're all in. We're not going to lose this race.
Then let me ask you, Congressman, I mean, you have made crime a very key central issue of your campaign. Nevertheless, we learned that 2 years after endorsing Donald Trump, the New York City Police Benevolent Association has given $25,000 to your opponent, Governor Hochul. Now, while they are taking no sides in this race, I don't believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, sir, they haven't given you any money. How do you feel about that?
Well, we've had over 50 law enforcement organizations throughout the state endorse us, including the 50,000-member Police Conference of New York. As far as the report that came out last night with the New York Post story, I have to tell you that that's far less than 24 hours ago. And we have heard from a lot of NYPD officers who are pissed off learning that their money went to Kathy Hochul, who is pandering to these pro-criminal allies in the state legislature. Listen, I come from a law enforcement household. My lieutenant governor, my running mate, is actually 25 years NYPD. So hopefully, over the course of the rest of the campaign, the decisions that can get made up at the top of the leadership structure, it would be great for them to support us. But we have a very
decision
large
on their part
majority
to
of their
give
people.
money to Governor Hochul, your opponent, that surprised you. Obviously, they might change their minds and give you money as well. They seem to be betting on that she's going to win. It might be tight, but it's got to bug you at some level. You made it clear that among some of your vocal supporters it does. But could I get your thoughts on that? I know Governor Ron DeSantis is going to be campaigning with you later today, I believe. And I was just thinking of the battle he has with Donald Trump, who's also backing you. How do you feel about that? I mean, I guess any support is great. You have two rising stars, already stars in the Republican Party, but they don't seem to flip over each other. Your thoughts?
We're getting a lot of support coming in, and it's not even just Republicans. In a couple days, by the way, we also have Glenn Youngkin coming into New York. But yesterday, I was in the Bronx with a Democrat former state senator and city councilman, Ruben Diaz. There's a bunch of sitting and former Democrat elected officials all throughout New York City who are very publicly endorsing our campaign. So the support is coming in from Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And the more the merrier.
Right.
Whoever else is out there, whoever's listening, get involved. This is an opportunity to save our state. So we certainly welcome max support.
I don't want to go back and rehash old issues. You were one of 147 House Republicans to object to certify Joe Biden's election victory. You had your reasons then. You reinforced them recently. But I just was wondering, if you lose this race as close as you've made it, would you accept the results?
Well, first off, we're not going to lose this race. Losing is not an option. But just playing along with your question, of course, if any election that you lose, you concede. However, in 10 days, we plan on listening to a concession speech delivered by Kathy Hochul.
Okay, the only reason I brought it up is you defended Donald Trump, who did not accept that defeat.
Yeah, so as I articulated in the past, which is something, as you pointed out, I still articulate today, is that we're going to have other emergencies in the future. And the U.S. Constitution states that state legislatures determine how an election is administered. And this is an important question for the future, because what we need to make sure is that, let's say it's a hurricane, it's a health emergency, it's some other type of natural disaster or some other excuse. You can't have non-state legislative actors deciding in the future that they're just going to change how that election is administered. You have to go through the state legislature. It was a constitutional question in the past. It remains today, and it will be an issue in the future. And by the way, election integrity going forward, looking forward, I happen to be somebody who believes that regardless of whether your candidate comes in first or second or third, that we should all always be concerned about election integrity and finding ways to make it easier to vote and harder to cheat. I'm in the city where right now there's a move. They actually passed a law, a court overturned it, and it's being appealed, where they were allowing hundreds of thousands of non-citizens to be able to vote in the November 2023 election next year here locally. I oppose that. Now, we're each allowed to argue our position, our side on that debate. I believe that it dilutes the constitutional principle of one person, one vote, which is a principle that belongs to United States citizens. Let's debate. Let's respect each other's opinion. I happen to believe that moving towards non-citizen voting is the wrong answer. Going forward, regardless of whether your candidate comes in first or second, we should welcome conversations about election integrity. It's something that ensures trust. And it also should be noted that at no point have I ever called the 2020 election illegitimate.
Or on that point, I'm sorry, I misunderstood you, that you didn't call it illegitimate, but you did want to stop to certify Joe Biden. I don't want to rehash all those, but can you have it both ways?
So as far as what happened in Pennsylvania and Arizona, which is where the two votes took place, My position, as I was just mentioning, is that you can't have these non-state legislative actors changing how the election was administered. It should be noted that while the violence you saw at the Capitol, the looting, the people breaking into the Capitol, that is not welcome on any day. It wasn't welcome that day. It can't be welcome in the past. It can't be welcome any point in the future. I was on the House floor. As soon as I learned of it, I instantly condemned it. It's not welcome. As far as what happens on the House floor, every single time a Republican has been elected president over the last few decades, congressional Democrats, they argue their objections on the floor of the House. It's part of the constitutional process. So as far as that process that takes place on the floor of the House, that wasn't something that was new or unprecedented. I was on the floor of the House on January 6th of 2017 when congressional Democrats were objecting that the Russians got Donald Trump elected. By the way, if the congressional Democrats wanted to argue that Martians got Donald Trump elected, they could stand on the House floor and have that debate and have that argument. And I'm sure it's going to happen again when Republicans win or Democrats win. There will be debates and objections. That's your time to do it. Don't take matters in your own hands and break into the Capitol and start stealing things and breaking things and hurting other people. You do it through your elected representative.
And you did. You spoke out against the January 6th attacks quite forcefully and vocally. Lee Zeldin, thank you very, very much. We'll be watching your race. It is probably the most stunning development of all the races we've seen in this bluest of blue states, a Republican who has the first chance in some 20 years of taking the governor's office. Just unprecedented.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.